Everyone, my name's Charlotte Hales and I'm Justice and Policing Lead at Virgin Media O2 Business. But today I'm here in my capacity as a member of techUK's Justice and Emergency Services Management Committee, where for the last 2 years I've been leading the Tech for Good work stream. But we're here today to discuss violence against women and girls and rape and serious sexual offences, two really important subjects, and we're going to be covering the journey so far and what the future might hold. Now, it's been a bit of a journey for VAWG and RASSO from a techUK perspective, and have to just do a quick call out to Georgie Morgan, who's Head of Justice and Emergency Services at techUK, for the work that she's done with National Police Chiefs Council, the Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force and Police Digital Service. It's really important that there's a spotlight on this subject, not just for the private sector, but it's about the role that they can play in delivering the digital strategic intent and actually the wider societal responsibility that private sector companies have in this subject. I'd like to firstly welcome our guests today. Thank you for joining. We've got temporary ACC Samantha Miller, who's MPCC lead for VAWG, Maggie Blythe's deputy working on the VAWG task force. We have Simon Morris, who's Programme Director for the Digital Forensics Programme at Police Digital Service. We've got Naomi Bolton, who's a former Chief Inspector, now working with Cloud Gateway and elected Chair of the newly formed VAWG and RASSO Working Group. And last but not least, Temporary Detective Chief Superintendent Melissa Larimore, who's Ops Area Implementation Lead. I'm just going to begin with some stats before we get into the conversation with our guests today. So the stark reality is that a woman is killed by a man every 3 days in the UK. Domestic abuse makes up 18% of all recorded crime in England and Wales. In the year ending March 2022, there were 194,683 sexual offences, of which 70,330 were rape. In addition, more than 21% of women have experienced serious abuse and harassment at least once online in the UK. I just want to start and ask our guests to reflect a little bit on those stats and also the past 2 years or so. Now, whilst I've been dealing with VAWG and RASSO for many years in my capacity as a former police officer, I think personally the murder of Sarah Everard felt like a pivotal moment. But what do you think? And I'm going to come to Sam first around those stats and where you think we've been in the last couple of years.
Charlotte, thanks very much for bringing me in to start with. I think anybody who listens to policing, and in particular Maggie Blythe at the moment, you know, Maggie will say that we absolutely do have an epidemic of violence against women and girls. And I think without a shadow of a doubt, Sarah Everard's murder was a watershed moment. It really did serve as a catalyst for an internal conversation, at least, that I've never seen before. And having worked now on the task force for 2 years, I would say that momentum has remained, which is a good thing. What I would say, though, however, is I don't think that discussion for women and girls in society was particularly new. 2 years ago, we didn't really even have an evidence base about the scale and nature of VAWG, both internally or in society. I certainly, as an operational police officer, felt unable to tackle the poor service often given to victims of violence and sexual offending. We see low outcomes, and I certainly feel that most victims would feel not listened to and generally not believed at times. In terms of our workforce, again, I would say a lot of female colleagues have tolerated misogyny. Very few colleagues who I talk to who don't recognise that poor culture for women in policing. So I'm not painting really, am I, a very positive picture, but I think we've got to be realistic of how it felt 2 years ago. And that's certainly how it felt for me in policing. In terms of technology and digital requirements, because I want to really recognise the audience that hopefully is going to take part in this discussion. Again, I would also say there's been very little investment in investigations and public protection. You only have to read the evidence base that's being given to us during the deep dives of Operation Bluestone, Sateri and Avon Somerset to see really that the nature of what investigations have to go through. And often successes that we talk about are often achieved despite our technology, not because of it. And I think that's a really poor place to be. From my own point of view, as a senior police officer responsible for things like domestic violence protection orders and other tools, I would feed back to all of us that they're pretty inconsistent in terms of how we use them. There is very poor oversight, and we don't look forward and try and understand what value they add to victims. And I think that's completely wrong. And I think investigators have very little chance of gaining a rich picture of threat and harm. But we are 2 years in, and I would say that the leadership that we've received, particularly from Maggie Blythe and also AC Louisa Rolfe, has really allowed us to step forward. So we do now have an evidence base in terms of threat, risk and harm. We've looked across policing and we've started to understand what the internal threat looks like. And this year we'll be looking again. We're delivering a second performance report. We have a baseline for year one. And of course, what we're trying to establish is what does that look like in comparison in year two. I'm going to pause there because I've done a lot of looking backwards, and I know you're going to ask me questions about what's the focus now. But I do think over 2 years we've made progress. I think we've done the fundamentals, which is understand where policing is at and what we really need to focus on in terms of improving our performance and getting the right service for victims of violence against women and girls. I'll pause there. I am really conscious that I've got my colleague Mel. Mel's leading on the implementation of Operation Bluestone Soteria. We're in early days, but I think in terms of green shoots and in terms of implementation, we have put a resource behind it. And Mel and her team are testimony to that they're taking that piece of work forward. So Mel, I think it might be useful just to come in at this and just have some early reflections about how it feels to be on a task force of Operation Bluestone Soteria and how that's feeling at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this. My first reflections really actually from a sort of personal perspective in terms of the role I was doing at the time of the Sarah Ebrard murder, which is, I think, something you referenced at the beginning of this. I was the RASSO lead at the time for the Metropolitan Police, and obviously it was very, very impactful on, you know, more than anything, victim survivors, but me in terms of listening to that voice of the victim and really sort of understanding that I don't think we'd really heard that voice of the victim probably up until that point. And I don't think we had fully prioritised violence against women and girls as much as we wanted to at that stage. I think reflecting on the tech side of things, certainly in the case of rape and serious sexual offences, I think there was very poor knowledge around use of digital and use of digital strategies to inform our decision making and prevent us going down routes where we over-investigate victim survivors, for example. To look at where we are now with Operation Soteria and the implementation of it, we now have the Soteria National Operating Model. And actually what that is allowing us to do nationally across England and Wales, all 43 forces, is to look at the evidence base from our year one deep dive review of 5 Pathfinder forces and identify what we needed to change and what we needed to improve. And that includes us being far more victim-centred, suspect-focused and context-led. And in the context of the technical side of that, it's ensuring that we do not have that over focus on victims. We shouldn't be automatically asking for their digital devices, and any digital strategy should be completed through agreed reasonable lines of inquiry. So the national operating model, what that brings is it professionalises what we do in the digital space without going to all the fine details. Pillar 6 of the national operating model is solely focused on the digital side of rape and serious sexual offence investigations. And that's from the how-to in terms of extracting data and using digital in a more effective way, but also giving guidelines, as I say, around those strategies and how officers can use those to prevent the impacts on victim survivors. So from an implementation point of view, we are in the implementation phase of Operation Soteria, working very closely alongside all of the academics that still support us, but particularly in the digital space as well. And yeah, I think that's where we are currently. We are in a completely different space to where we were 2 years ago. We've got the evidence base, we've got the knowledge, we've got the understanding, and now it's about us moving forward and implementing that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. And I think just from Sam and yourself, some really honest reflections around where policing was and how far they've come. It's really quite a huge problem to try and understand. And as you say, without a baseline, it can then be really, really difficult to understand what the best action is for the future. Lots of references there to some of the digital enablement that improves investigations and victim experience. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Simon to the conversation and find out around police digital services role and how that has evolved over the last couple of years to contribute to this.
Charlotte, thank you for the introduction. That's appreciated, and obviously appreciate the reflections from Sam and Melissa as well. So in respect to the work that PDS have done, I think we're not at the end. We're not even at the beginning of the end, but I think we are past the end of the beginning now. And I think that over the last few years, what we've done is we have done a discovery and a problem statement around what the issues actually are. And out of that, we've identified selective extraction and the 24-hour phone recovery as the main issues for us to deal with from a technical perspective. We then unpack that with the problem statement to understand what the tech deficit was, and that for us highlighted 4 areas, which were victim experiences. Mel has mentioned earlier on, it's not been great. Selective extraction of data from phones hasn't been good at all, and some forces do it better than others, but nationally the baseline isn't brilliant. Analysis and review of digital evidence, and lastly, presentation of and sharing the evidence with the courts. Those are the 4 areas that we've aimed to have a look at with our tech response. That brought us to the ACE Impact Lab, which we then developed the target operating model, which I believe is still with Home Office for review at the moment. Then we partnered with Soteria to help us understand how rape should be investigated in an ideal world and how tech can support that. So that's what we've done so far. In respect of the progress that's happened in the last few years, what we've done is understand how support of victims of RASSO through services tailored to their needs can be realised, so that we build confidence in reporting and prosecuting offences. Use the insight from the target operating model developed by the Digital Evidence Project to prioritise new capabilities, such as a integration platform and analysis and review applications. And lastly, maintain the momentum and keep policing on top of the emerging challenges through the approach to VAWG technology and us working with MPTC Science Tech, Home Office ACE, and yourselves at techUK. So that's what we've done historically. That's what we are doing now. And in respect to the next few years, well, what's important is, as mentioned in those 4 areas earlier on, that digital capabilities are enhanced for victims and the investigators that enable that swift and effective justice. And as a result of that, we see a significant rise in charges and convictions. We need absolutely to transform the way that forces can secure, interpret and present digital evidence. And lastly, that the partnership we have across government, industry and academia improves, thrives, is nurtured, so that public safety is enhanced and that we exploit tech going forward rather than just responding to failings. And certainly from my perspective nationally, one of our challenge areas is the 43 force model, as I'm sure you all know. By having a nationalised, for want of a better phrase, nationalised approach to the issue and a nationalised solution, technically, we should be able to overcome the inherent obstacles in that structure and lift the baseline of service so that everybody can expect and has the right to expect, obviously, much better service on a national level.
Thanks, Simon. And I think, you know, one of the key areas here is about collaboration. There's a clear message about the right people working together to have the conversations that are going to address some of the inconsistency issues that Sam referenced earlier in the conversation. I'd just like to take the opportunity to bring Naomi into the conversation, who's in a unique position whereby was a police officer working in that environment as a chief inspector and is now transitioned and working in the private sector and voted to lead the VAWG and RASSO working group. Just like to get some reflections from you, Naomi, about that transition, whether it be personally, professionally, but also how you found yourself in that VAWG and RASSO working group chair role.
Thank you. Yes, it has been an interesting journey, as you say, going from policing role into private sector, and I'm not particularly technical, so to end up in working in the IT sector has been a learning curve. But it has the ability to be able to help policing from a different angle. I find a real privilege, and to be able to not only sit on the VAWG and RASSO working group, but to chair it has been a really exciting opportunity for me personally. So I was voted into the role in the summer, and I think it is being able to have that understanding of the policing experience, but then also the understanding from the tech experience. You know, I still vividly remember victims that I dealt with as a PC on response. I still vividly remember the struggles around information sharing with partners. I still remember having to make those difficult decisions around signing off threat, risk and harm at 3 and 4 in the morning when you're dealing with a high risk domestic abuse, and all those pressures around competing demands and all those things. And I'm very aware as well that, you know, from when I joined as a PC to now, the increased complexity that frontline officers have to deal with, and what there is available in terms of digital evidence. There wasn't Ring cameras when I joined. There wasn't smartphone videos. There wasn't, you know, all the social media and everything else that's out there. We've learned a lot about disclosure, but I know there's still lots more to learn about disclosure. And we've got increased demand with a younger workforce. I remember, you know, in my you know, latter days of the chief inspector, the new joiners who were coming in haven't got that wealth of experience. So how do we train and support our officers when they've got so much to learn? But it's also constantly changing. You know, technology does not sit still. It's rapidly changing. You know, what's going to happen with the metaverse, Internet of Things, all these things I've had to learn about coming into tech world, but it will impact on policing. I think one of the reflections from coming from policing into private sector, and one of the really things I've enjoyed about the working group, is that I think as a police officer you have an impression of the private sector. And actually, my initial impression has been wrong, in that the values and the motivations of the members of the working group are all genuinely because they have a vested interest in this. They want to make a difference. As a group, we want to be victim-centred in our approach. It is around collaboration. It is around what we can do differently. And we are all focused on how can we make a difference. So that's been quite a refreshing surprise, I think, coming from policing into the tech world, that there is an opportunity for us to make a difference, and that's what we want to do.
Thanks, Naomi. And, you know, I can completely relate to some of those reflections, having been, well, I'm in the same position as you. One of the things that stood out there is we talk about how tech's evolved, and it has had a negative impact as well, right? You know, some of the statistics around online safety and women's feelings of online safety. And another statistic, around 10% of VAWG offences occur online, and 59% of those are stalking and harassment related. So, you know, it does have a negative impact. But in terms of the positive impact, you know, there has been some really great work in this space to use tech for good in trying to tackle VAWG and RASSO. And just to mention to the audience that earlier in the year, techUK did do some impact days to examine how technologies being used to tackle cases of serious sexual and violent crime. So we'll make sure that there is a link posted with the podcast so viewers can access the content. And Police Professional also did a great cover of the subject with some support from some professionals and experts in the area, including Police Digital Service and police officer leads. I think it would be good to just come back to Sam and get you to sum up really around where you think the VAWG task force is right now, and then we'll probably move on to having a discussion around the future and what comes next.
Thanks, Charlotte. And yeah, I'll give a very quick summary. We are in year 2 of delivery, and I think what became obvious through year 1 is that we have an opportunity in policing. We've got a window of opportunity where the momentum around the death of Sarah Everard has opened up a narrative in policing, and I think it's for the good. So again, I see real positives and opportunities in this. As a task force, therefore, we want to make sure that policing knows what good should look like, and therefore we'll be refreshing our framework for delivery. That goes to our chiefs for sign-off in December, and hopefully we will then move on it. And as Simon said, servicing 43 chiefs can be tough at times, so it really is a big ask to take a refreshed framework. But what that framework will do for us is give us a mandate to be talking to forces about the activity that we expect them to see. So you wouldn't be surprised to know that our list of deliverables between now and next April are quite lengthy, but they do centre around a few key areas. And I'll touch on these, and then I will do the focus that because I put a long list for you here of things that I think we should focus on. But that activity does focus on being accountable, demonstrating performance improvement, tackling some of the really knotty issues in policing that stop us improving. So the list, I'm sorry, Charlotte, is a little bit longer than you asked me for 3, and I got to 10 and I stopped. But the sorts of things that I talk about is, you know, at the end of the day, our job is to keep women safe, and that's absolutely paramount. So a basic system just to manage the oversight of orders is absolutely critically needed. We've got a fantastic support at the moment from the Home Office who've committed to scope out and understand what that looks like. So I'm really excited over the opportunity that a more systematic, methodical, digitalised management of orders is coming, but it is going to take a period of time. It's going to take money and it's going to take investment, but we're on that journey. And the point is it's started, which is fantastic. From report to core, and this is the ambition that Soteria really has unearthed for us, we need the digitalisation of the whole system, and it needs to meet the requirements of victims. At the moment, our processes don't reflect the voice of the victim, and we find that really hard in policing to take the voice of the victim and reflect service design on the back of it. It's really complicated for police, and we've got very traditional models of working. So the voice of the victim and how we get it at the heart of change is so critical. For me and for the VAWG task force, the single biggest piece of work and the starting point has to be the opportunity that we've created to have a look at the pinch points about the efficient way that we investigate violence against women and girls. And Simon talked about it, but it's just a really simple one, isn't it? Just an example around phones and the whole process and the way we manage that digital download and requirement. You know, we are the police, we have to gather evidence, we want to relentlessly pursue perpetrators and offenders, and particularly high harm, and yet our systems are really slow, they're really inconsistent, and therefore the work of PDS is really welcome, but that's where we need to go. Another side of it, we need to make reporting of VAWG really accessible. Single online home has been a great addition. Some elements of VAWG reporting have been placed on it. Not enough. It's limited in its scope at the moment about what you can report, so we need to make movement on that. We do need to make and offer out digital solutions to investigators for quicker and better investigations that really impact on victims. And then a biggie, really, and I'm hoping this audience really get behind this one, is we know we really do need to understand the online harm and how to operate within the new Online Safety Act. I think it is so significant piece of legislation, but I'm not sure we're rallied around the right conversation yet. We will produce a second threat, risk and harm assessment this year about what does that online harm look like, and that's at least a starting point. But I say all of that, Charlotte, and even just last night, I've been in contact with a victim for a variety of reasons, and she described to me she's now 3 years into a criminal justice case. She travelled up to Preston for the 3rd time from a home in Cornwall in the south, so a really significant break from work up to a case. And she got to the court, she got to the doors of the court, and of course it was cancelled for the 3rd time through lack of a prosecutor being available. So anything I say to her about the system not being stretched and overworked and overwhelmed really just doesn't land. And my heart breaks when I hear stories like that. So it's a big ask in front of us, and my approach at the moment with the task force is just take it a step at a time. Let's just get in front of us the processes where we can make a difference. Let's make sure we stay focused on the key elements, and the criminal justice system has to be our starting point. So I really, really welcome this conversation. I'll pause there, Charlotte, because I'm sure you want to go to others to ask that same question.
Thanks for those reflections, Sam. And I think, what's really clear is the victim being at the absolute centre of all this, and your passion for ensuring that wherever possible, the future direction should be around their experience, their needs, and trying to give them confidence, not just that justice will prevail, but that they have the support and that they're heard, their voices are heard. And I think, part of, or some of the digital aspects that you referenced there, the Online Safety Act, and perhaps that's one that's going to be important for the future from a techUK perspective, and the role that the suppliers can play in terms of supporting the work and the understanding and response to the Online Safety Act. I'm interested to come back to Simon, and I know that you talked briefly around the future and building that momentum and dealing with evidence. Just thinking about that focus on the victim in relation to some of the things that you've said, and conversations that are ongoing about just something as simple as a mobile phone. What are your thoughts there?
Thank you, Charlotte. I mean, I'll go off script a little if I may. What Sam mentioned earlier on about the victim experience, that's what the tech needs to transform. And I think we talk a huge amount about what the police want, what the prosecution want, what the defence want, what the courts want. And usually, not in this conversation, but usually the victim is the last person to be spoken about in that conversation. And I think the debate helped by the awful murder of Sarah Everard, but what it's given us is an opportunity, as referenced, to really accelerate whilst the public consciousness is there, to put the victim first, and then everything else should follow after that. So I think in respect of conversation nationally, it needs to be flipped on its head. The victim needs to go to court and get justice, and everybody else should fall into that, and the tech should help us do that. One of the issues we've had with the tech is, I think everything that we need to do technically to make things better is all out there, actually, but it's primarily in small pockets of capability. And our function as PDS is to join all of that capability up into a cohesive offering that puts the victim absolutely first, front and centre of the process. And so what we're working to land to help design is exactly that. But we need the help of suppliers, we need the help of procurement specialists, and the support of MPCC and forces to allow us to work in that national way to deliver the national outcomes that will really benefit victims. So that's our focus. Victim first, and the rest can fall in line around the technology.
Thanks, Simon. And I'll come to Naomi in a minute, because I think that there are some key points here that were actually only just discussed yesterday on the VAWG and RASSO working group, and probably areas that she'd like to respond to around the role as chair and the role that group can play in supporting that work. But I just want to cover off any points that Mel might have about Opciteria in relation to this conversation before I come to Naomi.
Thank you. Yes, and I guess really just to give the reassurance to Simon and also echo what he's said. Part of Opciteria, one of the big ethos behind it, if you like, is around procedural justice, which is exactly what you've just described, Simon. It's listening to the victim. What does the victim actually want? Ensuring our engagement with them is, honest and open and compassionate, but also making sure, exactly as you've just said, it is looking at that victim experience and what does that victim journey look like. And it's things we've already got in place or we are aspiring to achieve is the 24-hour turnaround if we do take a victim's phone. But I think also the other part to say in terms of Opciteria around the suspect focus, and again, Simon, it sort of links to your point, is that actually we have not been good enough at looking at the suspect's digital devices. We have over investigated the victim historically, and the whole evidence base for Opciteria tells us that, but the national operating model addresses that. But we do need to ensure that we're more robust around looking at suspect devices as well. And again, to use the ethos and some of what you said, Simon, it's very much victim-centred. Opciteria is victim-centred. It puts the victim at the heart of the investigation. We are suspect-focused and context-led, but ultimately the victim-centred side of it is the ethos behind Opciteria. So it's just to give you that sort of reassurance as well.
Thanks, Mel. Naomi, then, how would you respond to that? I know that you're very passionate about driving forward the tech community's response to VAWG and RASSO and the support to progressing this. So what are your thoughts on what you've heard from Sam, Simon and Mel?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to echo what Simon said, I think a lot of the tech solutions are already there. They're already available. But as you mentioned, get them to 43 different forces going through procurement, that is a challenge for the tech sector. It's how do we get those solutions there and used consistently? There's an issue with, just the foundations of, the network. How do we share this information? What is the most secure way of doing it? Not just across the 43 police forces, but across partner agencies. There has to be a whole system, approach and solution, and we're not there yet. And reflecting on what Sam was saying around the online harm, it has been really interesting joining the VAWG group and hearing from partners who, for example, run online dating apps and the kind of information and data they gather, and also what they can do in terms of prevention, or when they're gathering evidence. There's so much that business can do or are doing, and it's how do we share that effectively with policing. And that's why as a group we are there, because we want to share thought leadership, we want to share experience, we want to share solutions, but we want tangible outputs from the group. We don't just want to be a talking shop, and as I said earlier, we genuinely want to help policing and make a difference. So challenge us, task us, what is it you want us to do? And we are there, and I want to drive it. I want to be able to say in a year's time, 2 years' time, this is what the group were asked to do, this is what we did, and this is the difference it made to those survivors and those victims. But there's so much that we can be doing, and it's just what's the best way of doing that in the challenging context of policing.
Thanks, Naomi, and probably you might have already answered the question of what does success look like. But yeah, just it would be good to just go around and get a feel for, if we're sat here in 2 years' time, what would you like to be saying about what's happened from your perspective in that period and the progress that's been made. And I'll come to Simon first on that one, please.
No, it's okay. Thank you, Charlotte. I mean, from our perspective as PDS, I would want to see forces having the ability to draw down on a national baseline capability which lifts performance of all forces, so that victims everywhere have the same level of service. So that's what I'd want to see. I'd also want to see a better level of service, not just what we're doing. What we're doing isn't good enough, you know. So, and we have to constantly challenge ourselves to improve. And I think in respect of the tech itself, we have a position still where suppliers are competing for market share, and they are independently going out to forces and picking them off one by one, for want of a better expression. And that's benefiting them, but it ain't benefiting the victim. And again, changing that dynamic with PDS at the centre of that as the facilitator of all of that, to aggregate up the technology into one place, offer it out to forces so that forces can then consume it on an equitable basis, so that they get value for money out of it, and the victim gets a much better outcome. That's how I see it working over the next few years.
Thanks, Simon. Sam, what are your thoughts on success over the next couple of years?
Thanks, Charlotte. And before I again go into my list, I do just want to recognise what Naomi said there, because I think techUK and all the organisation that it covers have constantly reached out to us to say, tell us what you need. So thank you, Naomi. It really is heard, and it tells me that we've got to get our ask in order. We've got to know what it is that we want, but you know that's complicated, but know that it's been heard. I suppose the bottom line for me, Charlotte, is, you know, as I sit on a task force, it's a quite a small capability, but it does set an important place in the national landscape in NPCC. There is an opportunity here to do something to look at bits of the criminal justice system that really aren't servicing victims well. And we're talking about victims of volume crime here, domestic abuse. Even if we could just achieve a more timely decision around outcomes, you know, should we charge, what's the opportunity, what the protection orders that are needed in place, we would service a lot of victims a lot more timely and in a much more protective and safeguarding way. We constantly have people sat on weeks and weeks and weeks of bail at the moment while we're making those decisions. I understand why that's happening, but that can't be about servicing victims well. So there's something about having an effective joint justice plan with our colleagues in CPS, which is ambitious, but is honest about what's not working, and getting a more timely decision around charging would be really helpful to our victims. It's not easy to do. It really isn't, in a public sector that feels pretty lean and thin, but there we go. That's the ambition. The other thing is I do want to pick up on the work that Mel and the team are doing on Soteria, because they will start to see green shoots. You cannot look at the 6 pillars of Soteria and not believe that that is the gold service for victims and our workforce in terms of a good quality investigation. And when those green shoots appear, I want it all across public protection. Why shouldn't we be ambitious? And that's where we want to go. But at the end of the day, until victims or victim advocates and charities tell us that they're seeing a difference, that for me is what our measure should be. And the final group to look at, I think, which is where I want to finish, is, you know, when I talk to colleagues in policing, we will know when we see transformation. We will know when we have a sense of equality and inclusion, and when it's tangible. And to feel included and to feel valued is something. And, you know, I take myself as an example. When I worked part-time and bringing up a young family, I didn't always feel that I was particularly welcome in the organisation. It was tough to decide what to do with a part-time worker. So for me, good policing has to be good, you know, equality and inclusion. And my ask of all leaders in policing is that they demonstrate it and they do what they say they're going to do, which is to have a, you know, a good supportive working environment. I've got to look after female colleagues in policing because we've got to deliver a service for victims.
Thanks, Sam. Some really powerful statements and ambitions there, and you're not by yourself in terms of trying to deliver those. There's a whole community hopefully listening and nodding their heads and wanting to support that. Mel, just is there anything that you would like to add from an Obsteteria perspective there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's around achieving the consistency across all 43 forces in our ability and, I guess, professional capability in investigating rape and serious sexual offences. The national operating model under Soteria will achieve that, but it's looking forward to that being implemented widely and us really seeing that tangible difference that the national operating model will bring. I think also for me, it's the consistency again across 43 forces, but of the victim experience, the victim journey. It shouldn't differ depending on where you live or what background you've come from, or whether you're reporting a recent offence or a live offence, whether you're an adult, you're a child. It's about looking at that victim experience and ensuring the consistency. And I think lastly, I've touched on the procedural justice element of Soteria. Obviously, we want to improve our charge rates to court, but it is about listening to the victim. And I think particularly as we focus on the tech side of it, we do have victims engaged in the criminal justice system because of delays potentially to devices that we hold of theirs. And I think being able to, close down, I guess, barriers to a victim being able to stay engaged in the criminal justice process, again, for me, is really key going forward.
Thanks, Mel. And I know, Naomi, we touched on some of your aspirations moving forward by the nature of the conversation and your role, but is there anything that you would like to particularly highlight?
Yeah, just picking up on one of the points that Simon made around industry having to, pick off, 43 forces one by one. That really isn't the preferred approach, because it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, but also it doesn't provide value for money for policing. It isn't the most effective way. And I think, we're keen to understand, I think we talked about it in the working group yesterday, what is the best way of communicating? It's not about the hard sell, but it's about how do you demonstrate what solutions are out there, or how do we communicate in the most effective way? Because I'm really conscious as well, IT leads or other leads, they could be getting contact from so many different suppliers, and it's not an effective use of their time. So what is the best way when you have 43 different approaches to procurement, 43 different understandings of how we should be having conversations? I've seen it from both sides now, from the policing side and from, working with an SME. What can we do to move that forward? So I think that's one of the points that I picked up on. And I think just, as we've talked about, some of the solutions that would make a real difference to policing that Melissa's mentioned, we know that some of our working group members have solutions that can do those things, that can enable victims to upload the evidence they want to upload without having to hand in their phone and things like that. So what is the best way for us to demonstrate those things into policing that fits within procurement guidelines, that doesn't do anything that we shouldn't be doing, and obviously our working group in techUK is a really good conduit for doing that, but it's about understanding from a policing perspective and an industry perspective what's the best way of communicating, so that we're not having to do it 43 different times.
Thanks, Naomi. And as I've listened to all of you and your reflections, I've actually written down some key words here, 5 words that all begin with the letter C, and it's just coincidence that it's ended up that way. But I think, really caring about the victim and caring about this as a problem, not just for policing, but for society. It's commitment, people showing commitment to making a difference to VAWG and RASSO and how we tackle it. Communicating, really, really key. Naomi, you've really highlighted that there. Consistency across the country, consistency around how we deal with it from a policing perspective, but also from a supplier perspective and all of the stakeholders. And then collaborate. This is something that comes time and again in all of the podcasts that I've either been involved in or hosted, how we work together not just as professionals, but as human beings is absolutely critical here. So I guess those are my summary points. And I'm very conscious that we're probably well over time because it's such an important subject and everybody's incredibly passionate about it. There's one area that I don't want to avoid simply because of a personal call out that I want to make to techUK's members. But before I do so, I'd just like to come to each of you for, I guess, one thing, if you were to call out to the supplier community to think about after watching this, what would that be? Simon, I'll come to you first, please.
That's helpful. Thanks, Charlotte. And I'll just pick up on what Naomi mentioned about suppliers as well. I think for me, using PDS as the aggregator of that demand and using us as a conduit for the offerings into forces would make a massive difference into how we do things. So we don't want to work in a one force does this, another force that model either. PDS is there, Police Digital Service is there to make that easier, to make it a national offering, to aggregate up the products from suppliers into forces. So make use of us to do that. We're here to do that. We're here to help. And I think if we use that in the right way, we can really make a massive difference to victims of crime.
Okay, thanks, Simon. We've unfortunately lost Sam. She's obviously very busy and very important, so I'm grateful for her time. We'll tie up with a comment from Melissa, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, I think I would be saying accessibility and timeliness are key considerations for me. Yeah, in terms of having the accessibility to do what we need to do in a timely manner, I think is the way I would sum that up.
Thank you. And Naomi, in your role as chair, when you're thinking about not just the members of your working group, but the wider techUK community, what's your call out?
I think it's around that collaboration, that C word of how do we best collaborate and be, genuinely innovate and drive things forward in order to make a difference to those victims.
Perfect, thank you. I think I'm going to just do one final call out for my part, and I think there's more that we can do. It's not just about being tech suppliers, it's around our societal responsibility. This is a whole society issue, and I know that the PDS are great supporters of the Employers Initiative on domestic abuse, and certainly it's something that we're signing up to as Virgin Media O2 Business, and I know that there are others in the supplier community that have signed up to that. I think it's really important that people take a look at that. We'll share the link, but obviously it's about driving commitment towards supporting people who are victims of domestic abuse, but also looking at perpetrators as well. And equally, he for she is something that I think is really important for our male allies, colleagues to look at and consider the sign up for, because it's really, really powerful. I'm a huge advocate around allies, and it's a great opportunity for people to use their position and use their power to support women, not just in respect of violence against women and girls and RASSO, but just generally. So that would be my final point. But we're well out of time. I just want to thank Sam, who's already left us, Simon, Mel and Naomi for your contributions today. And it's been incredibly useful. Like I said, we could have probably spoken for hours, but we'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody.